Hey, good evening, everyone. I'm Paul Moore with Wellings Capital. So glad you could make it this evening. I'm going to give folks about 30 more seconds to join us. So sit tight and we'll get started. Okay, welcome everyone. I'm Paul Moore with Wellings Capital, and I'm so excited that you are joining us this evening. Tonight, we're going to talk about investing in mobile home parks or manufactured home communities, as they say. What do Buffett, Munger, and Sam Zell see in this overlooked asset class? I knew about this a long time ago, and my only experience in investing with mobile home parks was investing in mobile homes. And I can tell you, my friends, there's quite a difference. So I think I know almost everybody on the call, but I know this recording will go out later. So here's a little introduction about me. I have an engineering degree and then an MBA from Ohio State. I worked at Ford Motor Company. I had my own company for a while, and then I jumped into real estate investing almost 2 decades ago. I've got a podcast that I co-host called How to Lose Money, and this is the first time I've announced this. I think I'm about to release my third book on real estate investing. It's tentatively called The Book on Self-Storage, but we're not talking about self-storage tonight. We're talking about mobile home parks. So let's jump in. Um, the question of the evening is, why is a multifamily author not investing in multifamily at the moment? And why are we expanding to manufactured housing communities and self-storage? So let's jump in first and talk about multifamily. Now, why am I even bothering to talk about multifamily? I think it's because almost everybody I talk to, Bigger Pockets, podcasts, etc., say that they have been investing in single families, flips, small multifamily, large multifamily. A lot of folks I meet have read my book, and that's how we got to know them. And they're frustrated and they're looking for alternatives. And a lot of those alternatives are what we are expanding to, like I mentioned, self-storage and mobile home parks. So multifamily is awesome. I haven't dampened my enthusiasm from my not at all too terribly arrogantly named book, The Perfect Investment. The demographics and long-term outlook are really strong. The default rate in multifamily is almost zero. The problem is lots of other people know this too. So the space is significantly overheated. Cap rates are at record levels. There are 1031 exchange investors coming in droves. There are IRA investors. There's international money and institutional money coming in at high levels. And there's what I've affectionately termed the Nuru effect, the Nuru impact. Nurus are new gurus. Now, it's fine if you weren't investing in multifamily in the last recession, but it's not always fine if you're teaching people that it's okay to overpay. It's okay. Things are different this time. Well, you know what, folks? Things are not different this time. That's not true. There's a book called that. And we would all be wise to listen to people like, Munger and Ray Dalio and Howard Marks, who teach us, that things are always cyclical. They always go up, they always go down. And some of these folks, these Nurus, are wolves in sheep's clothing, and they make money from the transaction. They make money whether you and I as investors do or not. And I don't want you to be taken in by them. I told a lot of you that I was at a conference in Miami, and a very famous multifamily syndicator came on stage and he said, don't worry about overpaying for multifamily, just get in. Pay whatever you need to essentially to get in. And you know what? That's not great advice. Howard Marks, Warren Buffett, others would say that that's terrible advice, and my money's on them. Now, 93% of apartment buildings over 50 units are owned by corporations, companies with multiple assets that already have basically taken all the value. Many of them have taken the value up to the extreme already, and there's not a lot of meat left on the bone. There's not a lot of good deals. So right now, people are buying at the top of the cycle. When Howard Marks says they should be most cautious, they're being most ambitious. And those are the times that people get hurt. And they're the same people that are losing their facilities or their assets to the bank at some point. So we hope that doesn't happen to anybody, but it could. Now, this next slide is the most important slide of the evening, and it's where I'm going to spend a lot of time. Why I love manufactured housing communities, mobile home parks. First of all, they're recession resistant. They're steady in all cycles. I'm going to show you a graph later that shows that they didn't take any dip at all in the last recession. And we're going to talk a little bit about why that is. One thing that's great about them is that there's a shrinking supply. It's a unique asset class. There's no other asset class that we know of that has a shrinking supply every year. And a lot of that's caused by city councils, governments, areas that don't want these mobile home parks. And sometimes developers are taking them out to put in larger, more profitable buildings. But also, there's not only a shrinking supply, there's an increasing demand. The affordable housing crisis is real. There's a lot of jobs that aren't keeping up with inflation. You know, I made $11 an hour on two completely different college summer jobs 36 and 37 years ago, respectively. Now, I know college students graduating from college today, almost 40 years later, they're just getting that same pay for their full-time jobs. So people, there's a lot of lower paying jobs right now. And, 10,000 people a day are turning 65, and a significant number of them, 6 out of 10, have $10,000 or less saved for retirement. A lot of them do have home equity, though. And so there's an opportunity here for many of them to move into mobile home parks. Now, there's high switching costs as well, and many of us have heard about this. The cost to move a mobile home is significant. I mean, if you're paying $300 a month in lot rent and you don't like the manager, or you don't like your neighbor, or you want to move across town for some reason, most people in that situation aren't going to have $5,000 or $6,000 to get their mobile home moved. And if they're an older mobile home, there's a chance they'll be damaged. I've seen this firsthand. If it's a double wide, it could be $10,000 or $12,000. One of the things I like best is the fragmentation of ownership. Mom and pop owners. These are, and if you can imagine, if you've stuck your head into a mobile home park, you've probably noticed it is mom and pop owned. It means there's probably some clutter around. They're probably not super well kept. The manager may or may not be on site. They may be the owner. And honestly, they leave a lot of meat on the bones. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of upside, a lot of opportunity. There might be some empty lots. They might be charging way below market level. And we want to be sensitive. We don't want to raise these rates up to a right market level immediately necessarily if they're way below. But over time, they can be fairly raised up to the market level. And utilities, mom and pop owners often just eat the water and sewer and other costs. Those can be passed back, and that's very common that they would be with a professional manager. Another thing we love is diversification. Wellings Capital loves diversification. These are lower cost per unit than any other type of real estate that I know. Brandon Turner said one of the reasons he's investing in mobile home parks now is that low cost per unit makes them very attractive. You can spread out the same amount of dollars over a lot more units, which spreads your risk. Low maintenance and capital expenses is another thing we love. I've dealt with contractors for a couple decades. flipping a lot of houses, building a subdivision, a hotel, building a ground up multifamily, managing multifamily now, and don't love at all dealing with contractors. And I love the idea that there's zero maintenance on all these units, because owning a manufactured housing community means owning the dirt and the infrastructure, not the units themselves. Another thing we love is less competition. Now that's changing, but historically there's been less competition. People have overlooked this asset class, like I said before, and there's a stigma of mobile homes. But like Robert Helms says, live where you want and invest where it makes sense. Think about that. Now, there's also favorable depreciation schedules, which is a great tax shield. I'm going to do a quick little bit of math here to show you how powerful this can be. Now, you might think, if you're a tax or accounting person, that a mobile home park is mainly dirt, and I did mention that earlier, but it's actually more like 30% basis in land, raw land, 35% in land improvements, and perhaps 35% in goodwill. Now, the land improvements and the goodwill, that's 70% of the value in this example, can be depreciated 15-year straight line. So 15-year straight line depreciation means 4.66% a year can be depreciated. That's how much income can be shielded on an annual basis if you have a mobile home park you own in cash. However, if you're using a safe amount of leverage, like 60%, you divide the 4.66 by 1 minus 0.6, which gives you a 2.5x multiplier. So I know I'm throwing a lot of numbers at you, sorry folks, but 4.66% times 2.5 is 11.66%. That's how much income can be shielded on an annual basis in my example, at least. And that means you could earn up to 11.5% or a little more in income from a mobile home park and have a negative number on your K1. In other words, it would be negative. You would actually save on taxes through this. Pretty powerful. Now, there are some downsides to everything, including manufactured housing communities. Number one, mom and pop owners are hard to uncover. They're not, listed the same. They're sometimes not even on Google Maps. And most of them are, but they're harder to find. And it's harder to find the owner when you do. And when you find the owner, sometimes they're going to wink at you and tell you, well, I collect a lot of my money in cash. And their books are, on pencil and paper, if they have books at all, and they're not accurate. It's really hard to get a handle on how much money they're making and how much money you can make. There's also social pressure. Many of you probably saw a recent documentary by John Oliver that talked about, basically he was kind of really putting down capitalists and people who make money, and kind of lumping a lot of mobile home park owners into this group, which I think is pretty unfair to put them all in the same group. The folks that Wellings Capital likes to invest with have a great care for the community and the livelihood and the individuals living there. That's one of our criteria. There's also pressure from the community. People say, not in my backyard. I don't want this neighboring property. There's also pressure from planning and zoning, which I touched on earlier. Sometimes they'll actually tell a developer, if you want to get this project approved, like let's say it's an apartment or an office building, we'd like you to get rid of that mobile home park on the edge of town. That's been an eyesore for years. So that's one of the reasons they get sometimes eliminated. So, but that's not really a terrible thing. All these aren't terrible things, because let's face it, if there are barriers to entry, that means the people who work hard and persist are actually going to do even better. New homes and parks are not always easy to fill. This is a big one. A mom and pop operator typically wouldn't bring a new mobile home in. Let's say they pay $40,000 to Warren Buffett's company, Clayton Homes. They bring in a home, place it on site, and then they try to sell it because they don't want to rent it out. At least all the operators I know don't. But it's very difficult sometimes to get a buyer because they have to qualify for financing. And so this can be a problem. So there are some downsides to manufactured housing communities. This is where you need a professional operator. And if you're planning on buying one, please be a professional operator or hire a third-party manager. Now, this is yesterday's newspaper from my town, Lynchburg, Virginia. Look on the right side there. Solutions sought for the housing shortage. There's a affordable housing shortage right here. And I believe it says there are 578 affordable units needed for Lynchburg. Did you know that almost every one of the 300,000 to 400,000 apartment units being built and brought online in the US this year are Class A luxury apartments, and the majority of them are in certain pockets of large cities? That doesn't help the vast majority of the geography of the United States, and it doesn't help the vast majority of the income classes. People need affordable housing, and this is a solution that provides that. We talked about the mom and pop opportunity. You know, mom and pop self-storage and mobile home parks and apartments, they miss tons of opportunity. They leave a lot of meat on the bones, and they leave a lot of potential improvements out there for someone like a professional operator to capitalize on, and it can actually provide for a better community, as we're going to see in a minute. Now, there's a great value through aggregation. It's widely accepted that if you can put together a portfolio of any type of asset, that you're going to be able to get a better price from an institutional buyer, especially if you've upgraded them, made them professional. It's a compressed cap rate, and the value equation for commercial real estate says that if the cap rate is less, then the price will be more. Institutional buyers are jumping into the space like never before. In fact, I just saw this private equity report saying that the private equity giants are converging on manufactured homes. And this is a big thing, and it's a real opportunity if you are in a position to sell your manufactured housing community. I'm going to read through some of these quotes. Orlando's population has boomed for decades. Within Metro Orlando, the population of mobile homes has dwindled. 84,632 mobile home licenses in September 2014 is down 5% from 2009. In California, park owners must provide residents with at least a year notice if they're going to shut down, but they still do. Nearly 4,800 mobile home lots were closed in the state between 1995 and 2014. In Austin, Texas, the supply of mobile home lots dropped 18% in one decade. Think about that. Esther Sullivan, a sociologist in Colorado, estimates that 85 mobile home parks closed in the Houston area between 2002 and 9 years later in 2011. 85 parks closed. The number of mobile homes in the U.S. is decreasing at a time when affordable housing for low-income families is most needed, with the share of mobile homes in the U.S. at its lowest level since the 80s, says Biz Journals, Dallas. Now, there's that quote I mentioned earlier. I'm going to read it. 10,000 baby boomers turn 65 every day. 1 in 3 have zero retirement savings. Nearly 6 in 10 has less than 10,000. But all's not lost. About 60% of U.S. households own a home, and the sale of a home opens the door to the possibility of a trailer park life. So says Time magazine. I'm going to read a few of these quotes as well. Live where you want. I told you that. Baby boomers are entering their golden years. 1 in 3 have zero money for retirement. Approximately 10 new manufactured housing communities have been built in the U.S. in the last 2 decades. Not sure that's right, but it is an anomaly for sure. And Ryan Burt from Green Street, I love another quote he has where he says down at the bottom here, Green Street does not buy properties, but if we did, given all we know across all the different real estate property types, if we were to start buying properties now, we'd have a pretty heavy overweight to mobile home parks simply because we think the outlook is favorable. So I want to read one more quote right above that one. Risk is relatively low for manufactured housing lenders. Second only to self-storage, the asset class has one of the lowest rates of default. And so I'm not going to go into this much, but Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae like this space so much that they actually have really low interest rates for people buying mobile home parks, and they allow operators to refinance twice in the first 5 years with no interest rate increase and no penalty. So pretty powerful. This graph's a little hard to understand. The average square feet are the stars, and you're wanting to be as high as you can on the star. And then the average monthly rent are the bars, and you want to be, of course, as low as possible. Now, manufactured housing on the left has the highest ratio by far, of course it does, of square footage to rent at 34 cents a square foot. At the other end of the spectrum, average single family home rental is 84 cents per square foot, well over double. And apartments are 92 cents a square foot, approaching triple. So it's pretty cool. Manufactured housing communities compared to 2-bedroom apartments. You can see in California, the lot rent is less than half of the apartment rent, a third, or actually less than a third in Connecticut, about a third in my state, Virginia, less than half in Florida, and on and on. So the lot rent is very low. Now, I have to put a caveat in here. This assumes that they own the mobile home. And of course, there's a cost to owning the mobile home that's not factored in here. Now, capital expenditures I mentioned earlier. Look, multifamily has 12.2% average capital expense as a percentage of revenues. The overall average is 8% or so. Manufactured housing is way down here at 3.6%. Many of you have seen this graph before. This shows the same property net operating income growth of all these asset classes. Now, everyone took a dip during the Great Recession. Oh, not everyone. Manufactured housing didn't. It actually just kept on sailing. And we talked about that earlier. It's real. And if you think through it, where do you move down from a mobile home? I guess back in your parents' basement or under a bridge. There's not a lot of people who give up their mobile home. And every mobile home operator I've talked to has said this as well. Here's a graph showing that mobile home manufactured housing has the highest return by quite a margin over everybody else. Self-storage and healthcare are next. Now, why is Jeff Bezos here again? Well, if you didn't hear the story before, he took the light bulbs out of all the vending machines all across Amazon facilities. He said, why do I have to spend money to advertise Lance or whatever? He figured that there was a cost to the light bulb, a cost to the electricity, a cost to the maintenance labor to replace the light bulb, and he said, why bother? There's a reason behind this, though. He knows that there's a price to earnings ratio with Amazon stock. Every time he can save or make an extra dollar per month, that's $12 per year, and that's multiplied many, many times over in the value of the firm and therefore the value of his shares. And I think he knows what he's talking about. He's run Amazon for 25 years as of last week. But that same principle applies to commercial real estate investing. It's probably one of the reasons that most of the Forbes 400 invests in commercial real estate. Let's say you took $1, you added it to the bottom line, that's $12 per year. Now the value formula in commercial real estate is completely different from residential. In residential, the value of your home is based on the comparables or the comps. But the value of commercial real estate is a formula. Value equals net operating income divided by cap rate. That's a really important formula. So if you can add $12 to your net operating income, divide it by an average cap rate of about 6%, that's 0.06, you just added $200 to the value of the asset. But that's not all you get. It's better than that, because if you use leverage, the return on the asset, which let's say it's a certain amount, it's actually leveraged to the equity. So with just a fairly safe value of leverage, 60% loan to value ratio, that's a 2.5x return on equity. So if the return on the asset is 10%, then that would be a 25% return on the equity. Pretty powerful. So let's go over a few quick examples before we wrap up of how you can create more value at a manufactured housing community. Let's say you filled 15 vacant lots, 15 times $350 a space, which is a pretty good rent, times 12 months. Now take that and divide it by a 6% cap rate. You're going to see a significant increase in value of the mobile home park. I haven't run that number, but I'm guessing it's close to $1 million. Think about that, from filling 15 spaces. Now, saving $25 per client per month on water bills by passing the fee back to them, multiply that by 300. Multiply that number times 12 months, then divide it by the cap rate. Significant. Raising the lot rent by a modest 5%. Multiply that by 300 spaces or so, or negotiating a cable internet deal for your park. You can give your residents much, much better internet. You can actually save them money, and you can get a revenue share. Pretty powerful. I know this because we're doing this right now at a property that we own. Now, here's a real example. I'm going to round the numbers to make the math simple. Let's say you got to your mobile home park. We invested in one like this recently, and there were a lot of cars sitting around, boats, RVs, work trailers. And let's say we spent $100,000 to pave an acre of weeds and put a fence and a gate around it, and you charge them for the outdoor storage. You said if you've got a third or fourth or fifth or sixth car sitting in front of your mobile home or a work trailer, you've got to put it in here and pay us a fee. And we're also going to go out to the community and charge them to store their boats and RVs. Now, $100,000 cost, $10,000 a month in total rent. That's $120,000 a year. Divide that income of $120,000 by 0.06, 6% cap rate. That raises the value of that park on paper by $2 million. Wait, let's say that park only cost $5 million, and that was $3 million in debt, 60%, and $2 million in equity. Well, that new $2 million in value just basically went to the equity holders. So the $2 million in equity just went up, at least on paper, until the time of the sale, to $4 million. It doubled. This one change that I'm talking about here in this example is doubling the value of the equity for the equity holders. Now, if that took 4 years, that's 25% equity appreciation per year. Pretty powerful. Adding a billboard, adding an ATM, adding carports, adding sheds, and renting them to the residents for a very moderate price. All these can benefit the users, the tenants, a lot, and for a moderate price, and it can benefit the value equation in a really powerful way. Like I said, there's a trailer park stigma, and a lot of people think of the one on the left here, which is pretty gnarly, and a lot of those out there are like this, but the ones on the right are the ones I'm talking about investing in, and that's the kind that institutional grades that we would like to invest in, at least at my company, and probably you would feel the same way. Here's an example of one in Lancaster, Ohio. It's pronounced Lancaster, you folks from Pennsylvania, because it's in Ohio. That's how they say it. This is a park that I visited in January. We are investing in this park. Here's one in Minot, North Dakota. We have 3 park investments in Minot. And here's one in Gillette, Wyoming. And Benjamin just visited this one about a month and a half ago. And Benjamin, did you get up in a tree to take this picture? That's a great picture. Anyway, that's got about 500 lots. You can see it's orderly, it's nice. It's only got a few cars and actually pickups in front of each trailer. And so it's a really nice place to live. Now, speaking of nice places to live, this is really, really important to Wellings Capital and part of our big why. And I would encourage everybody to have a big why. And in our case, we really want to provide not just, you've heard the term little metal or big metal boxes that spit out money. We don't see it that way. Sure, they're profitable, but this is someone's home. This is someone's community. This is where someone's going to create memories that last a lifetime. And this is a friend of mine took this picture because he owns this mobile home park in Texarkana, and he was there one day in an office, and he heard this mother whispering to her daughters, "We're going to buy a home today." And they were so excited. And because they were actually buying the home that they had just come into, and they had come in to close on it and move in. And a few months later, he saw them and he took this picture. Now, this could be a single mom, and this could be her ticket out of an expensive mortgage or an expensive apartment, more likely. It could be the ticket that allows her to go down from working 2 or 3 jobs down to 1. It could be the ticket to save money for these 3 precious daughters' education. And this is important to me as an investor. I hope it's important to you as well. A couple guiding quotes that have guided me as we do this. I'm not an expert in managing mobile home parks, but I want to partner with people who do. And if this seems overwhelming to you, but you still want to get in on being part of a mobile home park, you can take John D. Rockefeller, one of the wealthiest people in world history. You can take this quote and think about it. I would rather earn 1% off 100 people's efforts than 100% of my own effort. And mom and pop owners would rather earn the 100% off their own effort. But a professional operator with a team and somebody you could partner up with, maybe you and your friends want to throw in some money and go buy one of these and hire a professional operator to run it. This is kind of the mindset if this seems overwhelming. One of my investors recently said, "Why should I work harder than I need to make less than I could?" She had just had this light bulb moment where she realized she didn't want to flip houses anymore. She wanted to throw her money in a pool and invest together. And that's what I recommend that you consider doing if you decide to get involved in mobile home park or manufactured housing community investing. So, hey, thank you for joining us this evening. We are really thrilled that you're here. And if you're watching this on the recording, sorry you won't be able to answer or ask any questions, but hopefully you'll get your questions answered. So I'm going to put in my earbud here so I can hear Ben. And I'm going to take a look at a few of these questions here. So please, if you have questions, put it in the question box right now. It would be fantastic if you would do that. So, okay, so someone says, "I can't see your screen." Okay, Mike, well, hopefully you see it now. I don't have anybody else saying that, so that kind of scares me. Chris, hi Chris, how are you? Glad to have you on board. Chris is one of our friends and investors. Hey JJ, great to have you here. Okay, so Massimo says, who would be the operator? That's a great question. So there's a couple different structures here. There's 3 different structures that you could use to run your mobile home park. And one, you could be the owner operator. And that's a legitimate thing to do. You could live in a home nearby or a mobile home or a home attached to the office, and you could operate it yourself. And a lot of family businesses, they do that, and they get wealthy and do that. So not a bad thing. Second model would be for you to be the asset manager and you to hire a property manager. So that would be like you directly hire a property manager. You effectively become the property management firm because you're not using a third party. And so that's the second model. The third model would be for you to be the asset manager and hire a third party property management firm. That's a company who does their own books, has their own HR, and they invest. They manage parks. They manage properties for you, and that is certainly a good option. Somebody asked, Paul, is the hold period for Mac and self-storage different from multifamily? No, I wouldn't think so. I mean, it's all dependent on the investor's desires. So one thing I see in self-storage in particular and in multifamily in years past, not recently, is the value adds can be so steep that you can maximize your IRR by doing massive improvements in year one, becoming stabilized in year two, and selling in year three. That's, again, a lot of value add apartments and self-storage have been that way. You don't see that steep of an incline in mobile home parks. It's just like that you don't have that dramatic slope upward. They're just steadily moving upward. So that would cause me to believe that you should look at a longer term hold. But like I said, there's not a rule. Please submit your questions. Before we wrap up this evening, we want you to make sure you get your questions answered. So, hey, Shinyi, hi, Paul, how can we find good operators to partner with? Okay, so there's podcasts out there. There's a few podcasts, at least one I know of, and I know they advertise some operators to partner with. Another way to do that would be to go online, do some research. You can email me. I know 3 or 4 operators that we really like. You could also go to crowdfunding sites. There's crowdfunding sites that have mobile home park operators, and you can invest through the crowdfunding site. Some of those are for accredited only, and some are for accredited or non-accredited. Wellings Capital, I said I wouldn't pitch, but Wellings Capital invests, and we pool investors together to invest in these type of properties as well. Mike says, what is an expected return investing with a company like yours? I wasn't supposed to pitch. We are targeting a return of 15% total annual return, and that would be a 7 or 8% return, cash on cash annual return from operations, plus another 7 or 8% appreciation and principal pay down. So 15% total annual return is what we are targeting. Hey, Chris, do you have a certain Fannie or Freddie representative broker that you used before that you like? Yeah, Chris, email me and I'll introduce you to somebody. We work with the Berkadia office out of Houston, Texas, and we really like them. Now, Berkadia, again, Warren Buffett, it's a Berkshire Hathaway, partially owned by Berkshire Hathaway Company. We really like them, and they do a lot of Freddie and Fannie. What's the minimum investment amount required? There's a lot of these deals that have a minimum of $25,000. That's the most common, I'd say, is $50,000. I've seen 25. I've seen crowdfunding sites with $10,000 minimums. Mike, our company has a $50,000 minimum. Jeff, hey Jeff, how do we know that our money is secured by actual assets when investing through your investment group as opposed to a scam that gives you great numbers? Jeff, we actually, when we close on properties, we actually do a closing announcement and we show the deed or the closing statement in some cases. Any investor at any time can ask for us to show that, and we're happy to provide that. We're also happy to provide the proof that we are investing, that we have shares of the operations that we're investing in. And I think that's really important part of your due diligence. We have a 21-point checklist, and we think that you should develop your own checklist for whoever you're going to invest with. I did a podcast today with somebody, and we talked about early investing mistakes that we had made. And it's so easy to just jump in and look at only the upside. You know, an entrepreneur, a new investor will typically say, hey, look how much money we can make. They ask one question really well, and that is, how much is the upside? But not as many ask the second question, which is really important, and that is, what is the potential downside? What can I lose if this goes south? And everybody needs to ask this. And then the real professional investors, very few of them actually, ask a third question that I recommend that you ask, and that is, if it goes south, can I live with that downside? Really important that you ask all three of those questions anytime you're investing with anybody. So we're going to wrap up in a few minutes here. So if you have a question, I'm encouraging you to submit it now. I'm going to answer one more here. Are you bringing any parks to the funds or as individual opportunities? You know, Benjamin and I talked about this yesterday, and next year we might do a few individual opportunities, but right now we're just bringing mobile home parks, manufactured housing communities into our fund as a whole, and we're bringing them into our Wellings Income Fund. And so we're not providing any individual opportunities, at least with Wellings Capital. If you want one of those, you can find those with other operators. I'm sensing here that Ben wants to chime in on that previous question, or at least something.
How did
So
you know,
Ben,
Paul?
I just felt,
Yeah, this is Ben Colley. Yeah, Jeff, and whether you're betting us or another group out there, there's lots of fantastic investment companies out there. Um, I think getting to know the key people is really important, and visiting the properties in person is really important yourself if that's something that you want to do. We have open invites for any of our investors to come with us whenever we're on the ground visiting one and
right.
see how things work and meet the on-site managers and get a feel for the property management style. Yeah, I think being slow is important when vetting an operator, kind of like Paul was saying. Just and one other thing, we have a third party fund administrator who handles all of our books and accounting, and we welcome people to talk to them and get a feel for how things are running in the back end that way. And not every company has that, and that's fine, but ask the detailed financial questions and ask who's looking over the shoulder, because that can be yeah, I mean it's a very real question, and glad you asked it, Jeff. So hopefully that answers
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks, Benjamin. Thanks for jumping in on that. So unless there's another question that pops in the next few seconds, I'm going to leave you with this thought. I'm writing a book on self-storage. Like I said, I'm hoping that'll be published by this fall, 2019. But I'm already about a third of the way down the road on the next book, and that book is going to be affectionately entitled Warren Buffett's Rules for Real Estate Investors. Ben and I have been studying Warren Buffett, his investing strategies, and we know he doesn't talk much, if at all, about real estate. And so we're trying to take his principles and apply them to real estate investing and give us real estate investors some of his great knowledge. And Warren says, what does he say? He says, successful investors say no a lot. He says, but really successful investors say no almost all the time. And when you're thinking about whoever you're going to invest with, or whatever operator, whatever asset you're going to invest in, make sure your default's no, because it's really important. It's really easy to be optimistic. It's really easy to get burned. And it's really important that you don't squander the money that you have to invest. So with that, I'm going to wrap up this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. We value your time. We know you value your sleep, and we appreciate you being with us, hanging in this late in the evening. So thank you. Hope you have a wonderful evening. And if you have any more questions, please email Ben or I at info@wellingscapital.com. That's info@wellingscapital.com. Thanks. Have a great evening.